Hello guys, and welcome back, or welcome to my YouTube channel. In today's video, I will be reading an original short story of mine entitled Crabbing, a folk horror story based partially on my own childhood growing up on the British coast. I've been meaning to get this video out for a few weeks, but summer's been busy, life's been lifing, but finally here it is. So, without further ado, settle in and get ready for a spooky tale. It's time to put them back now, darling. They belong in the sea, her mother said. The smell of salt and silt was in the air, and sand squished between her toes. A spraying wind whipped her hair across her face. Holly clutched her prize, the handle of a bright green plastic bucket. And within, beneath a few inches of gritty water, crawled half a dozen crabs. They moved like wind-up robots, side to side, up against the walls of their plastic prison, pincers snapping as the bucket jostled. Each one had been hard won. Holly had picked the chunkiest, fattiest morsels of bacon from the pack they had bought to bait her reel. She had gone out across the sucking sands, hand in hand with Mum, to the deepest pools where she knew the pickings were best. Every week they went out to the shore together to catch some crabs, but now the tide was starting to come in and the grey clouds above threatened rain. It was time to go. "Can't I keep just one?" she asked Mum. "It would be cruel," she replied. "A crab won't survive for long outside the sea. Come on now." Reluctantly, Holly upended her bucket, sending the crabs tumbling one over t'other onto the ground. Some skittered towards the water, others buried themselves in the wet sand. The mother and daughter watched them go, then turned and made their way home. It began to rain. The village was barely half a mile from the sea, protected from the tide by a concrete embankment that encircled its northern side like a castle wall, holding barbarian hordes at bay. Their house was right on that frontier. It was just the three of them, Holly, Mum and Dad, and there had never been many other kids in the village. But that was how Holly liked it. At school she had learned how in the olden days people thought that the earth was flat, and if you sailed too far you'd fall off the edge of the world. Looking out towards the sea from her house, you could well believe it, an outcrop on a strange, quiet edge of the world. It was mac and cheese for tea tonight, and then it was a game of charades and a hot chocolate, then a story from Dad and bed. Dad flicked off the light as he left, and Holly lay there trying to sleep. Her window faced north, towards the water, and every night she could hear the rushing and crashing of the waves. Usually it soothed her to sleep better than any lullaby, but tonight she was restless. The sea was restless. She couldn't stop thinking about those crabs, how much she would like to be able to keep just one. She lay in wait. She could hear the muffled sounds of her parents watching TV downstairs. She waited. Perhaps an hour passed. Her parents went to bed. There was silence. Silence save for the sea. The hours ticked past towards deep night, and Holly rose from her bed. She grabbed her torch from her drawers. She opened her door inch by inch, sliding through the gap before the hinges began to squeak. She tiptoed downstairs, hopping over the 9th step so it didn't creak. When she reached the hallway, she clicked on her torch, illuminating everything in silvery relief, and sending shadows fleeing into the corners. There, in dead silence, she gathered her crabbing gear, donned her coat and wellies, and slipped outside. It was still drizzling outside, but Holly was not deterred. She went out to the edge of the village and walked down the pier that jutted out from the concrete embankment. It was low tide again. A gleaming moon peeked out through a gap in the clouds. She sat on the edge of the pier, baited her line with bacon, and cast it out into the tide pools below. She waited, then reeled the line back in. Nothing. The chunk of bacon still hung on its hook, undisturbed. She cast again into a larger pool. She waited, she reeled in. Still nothing. A third time she flung out her line and waited and reeled it back in. No crabs. It was growing colder and the rain was falling heavier, and every sensible fibre of her being was telling her to turn around and go back home before her parents found out she was gone. but something drew her eyes across the sands towards the shore. So there the dead of night found her, trudging determinedly across the coastline. She struck out east with the ocean to her left. It all seemed different at night. The grey landscape stretched out south and east and west, blurring into the distance like an unfinished painting. Every floating wisp of cloud was an evil wraith. She shivered and pulled her coat about her. Behind her, very faintly, a few lights from her village twinkled in the night. She pressed on. She must have gone far beyond the pools that her and Mum had crabbed in that day. The pools that opened up around her now were vast moors of sucking silt and black water. Behind them gnawed cliffs loomed above her, their heights lost to thick, misty clouds. The lights of the village had long since faded into the fog behind her. She sat down at the edge of one of the pools. The rain pattered to a halt. A cloud parted, and the silver light of the moon shone down onto the black waters. Dark shapes shifted and moved beneath the surface, revealed by the moonlight, sending out ripples as though the pool were its own ocean with its own tide. She stared deep into the abyss and cast her line. After a time, something tugged on the line, something strong, insistent. Holly began to reel. She pushed herself to her feet, dirtying her palms, and stood, heels digging into the mud as she pulled. The string dug into her hands. She heaved with all the might her 12-year-old frame could muster. Inch by inch she began to drag her prize up out of the depths. She could feel it, whatever it was, knocking against the walls of the pool. With a final effort, she dragged her prize up over the muddy lip onto the sand in front of her. It was a crab, a huge one, bigger than any she had ever seen. She was not sure if it would even fit in her bucket. Its shell was the blue-green of a stormy sea, pocked with barnacles and trailing fronds of seaweed. Its mandibles were still clasped on the chunk of bacon she had baited her line with, while beady, stalked eyes regarded her with an alien curiosity. Its limbs began to unfurl robotically, and it marched towards her, pincers raised. She circled behind the creature and scooped it up swiftly and almost fearlessly. The thing was heavy as a brick. Its claws flailed about in front of it, but they couldn't reach her. Putting it in the bucket proved to be a challenge. It wasn't too big, but whenever she tried to lower it into the bucket, it would splay its legs, catching them on the edge. She ended up turning it sideways and dropping it rather unceremoniously in. It hit the bottom with a dull thud. Its limbs twisted as it righted itself and began to crawl its way back out. Holly shoved it back in. It began again. She pushed it down once more, then took off her coat, wrapping it over the bucket and knotting the sleeves beneath. It was imperfect, but it would do for now. She hefted the bucket and began to set off for home. Within its prison, the crab would prod and probe at her coat, and every now and then the spiny tip of a leg would poke out from beneath. But it made no more serious attempts at escape, and after a while it seemed to settle down. Perhaps it was asleep in the dark. The walk home felt very long. With her prize won, the manic energy that had possessed her left her, and she became very suddenly aware of how tired, cold, and wet she was. The thin metal handle of the bucket dug into her hand, so she had to switch hands every few minutes. Before long, both arms were aching. The moon had dipped back behind the clouds, and it was now impenetrably dark. She walked for so long that she began to worry that she had gotten turned around somehow, and wasn't headed the right way at all. But she knew that, logically, if she kept the crashing sounds of the sea to her right, that she was going the right way. Eventually she could see the lights of her town emerging from the fog, fewer than there had been when she had set out. She could not even have guessed what time it was now. She reached the village and crept through the empty and unlit streets like a shadow. She reached home just as a tinge of pale light began to touch the night sky. She fumbled in her coat pocket for her house key. She wondered how best to unlock the door. Slowly and cautiously, or should she just get it over with as quickly as possible? She opted for the latter, jamming the key into the lock and turning it fast. The loud click seemed to ring like a gunshot through the night. She waited, listening out for signs of her parents stirring. All seemed quiet in the house. She slipped inside and closed the door behind her softly, setting the crab bucket down. and pulling off her wellies, then lifting it up again and creeping upstairs. She returned to her room and stood completely still, listening. Only after she had stood there for a good 5 minutes was she completely sure that she hadn't woken her parents. She flicked on her bedside lamp. Next to it, her digital clock blinked 4:47. Finally, she stood down to unwrap her coat from the bucket. In the dim orange light of the lamp, the crab began to unfurl. Inside, and in the light, it looked even bigger. Its pale eye stalks extended towards her, waving to and fro. "You should put me back," the voice echoed inside Holly's mind. Her entire body went cold. Every hair stood on end. The voice had not come from the crab's mouth, whose mandibles twitched meaninglessly, yet there was no doubt in Holly's mind that it had come from the crab. Her tongue felt like a hunk of stone in her mouth, yet somehow she knew that she did not have to speak aloud. "I fished you up fair and square," she thought. "You're my prize. I get to keep you." "I am fairly won, that is true. Still, you should put me back." "Nuh-uh." "Then at least feed me." "I'll feed you tomorrow, if you promise to not try and escape." The crab did not reply, but its eye stalks shrank back into its body, and its legs curled inwards. It hunkered down and appeared to sleep, if crabs slept. Holly took that for agreement. She slid the crab bucket beneath her bed, and then crept beneath the covers. Sleep took her surprisingly fast. That night she dreamed of dark waters. Mum woke her up the next morning, throwing open the curtains and letting the late morning light stream into her room. "Time to get up, sleepyhead." Holly rubbed the sleep from her eyes. "Did you not sleep well last night, darling? It's late for you. It's almost 10. "Yeah, bad dreams. I'll be down in a minute." "Okay, I'll get your breakfast on." Breakfast was bacon, eggs and toast. Dad had already had his and gone for a Sunday morning jog, so it was just Holly and Mum. Whenever Mum's back was turned, Holly would sneak a morsel of bacon into her pockets. She could feel the hot greasiness soaking through the fabric onto her legs. She wolfed down breakfast and ran back upstairs. "Where are you off to in such a hurry?" Mum asked, but Holly didn't answer. She clicked the latch shut on her bedroom door and pulled the bucket out from under the bed. Last night seemed like one of her dreams. She was half expecting the bucket to be empty. But when she peeked in there it was, that blue-green shell. "Morning crab," she thought. "Have you bought food?" it asked. "Here." She pulled the bacon out of her pocket and tossed it into the bucket. The crab caught a hunk in its pincers and brought it up to its mouth. It ate faster than she had ever seen a crab eat before, shoving flesh and fat into its sideways mouth with unchecked greed. "Is there more?" "That's all I could get for now. I'll still more for you at lunch and dinner." "Very well." She went back downstairs just as Dad was returning from his jog. It was a bright sunny day, so Mum ventured that they go out to the woods for a picnic. Holly helped her prepare the food. They packed ham and cheese sandwiches, hard-boiled eggs, a grab bag of crisps and homemade flapjacks, plus 2 thermoses, one filled with icy, cloudy lemonade, and the other with tea. They set off south out of town and followed the coast a ways before turning inland. Past the dunes of long, spiny grass was a stretch of pine woods, no more than a mile wide, but several miles long. The woods were bright and airy. They walked to one of their favourite spots, a small hillock in a clearing, where wildflowers peeped out amongst the grass. There they sat and had their picnic. It was such a nice day, and the food was so tasty that she almost forgot to sneak a few morsels into her pocket. Her journey through the dark and the rain last night felt like a distant dream there upon the sunlit grass. It was late afternoon by the time they returned home. Holly rushed upstairs once more to feed the crab. As she shut her bedroom door beside her, there came a loud scuttling sound from underneath the bed. She stooped to look down beneath. The bucket lay on its side, and the crab crouched beside it, watching. She could have sworn it was larger than it had been last night. "Here, I got you some more food," she thought. She tossed a chunk of sandwich onto the floor in front of the bed. It dashed out so fast that Holly jumped backwards. It grabbed the food with its pincer and withdrew back under the bed. Holly threw the rest of the food from her pocket under the bed in one handful. She could hear it scrabbling and chewing, and in her head she could hear its contented, dissonant hum. The next day was Monday, back to school. She could barely focus in her lessons that day. Her mind kept wandering back to her bedroom, where the crab crouched beneath her bed. She kept back a portion of her lunch that day. At tea time after school, her mum caught her, trying to slip a piece of chicken into her pockets. "Holly, what on earth are you doing?" Holly blushed, having to think fast. I saw a squirrel in the garden the other day. I wanted to bring it some food." "Squirrels don't eat meat, honey," her dad said. "And besides, you shouldn't leave food outside in the garden. It'll attract rats. I thought I heard something scraping beneath the floorboards last night." That night, she went to her bedroom empty-handed. "I couldn't get anything for you this time. I'm sorry." The crab's shout was like a cymbal clash in Holly's head. "Feed me, feed me. If you are to keep me here, you must feed me. That is our bargain." Holly fled her room. She stood against the door, panting and holding back tears. She could hear the horrid thing's legs scraping against the floor. She went downstairs to make some toast. The next fortnight continued in much the same way. Each meal she would squirrel away what food she could, and when she returned home from school she would go to her room and feed the growing creature beneath her bed. Within a week it had grown as large as the giant spider crabs they had in Japan, but squatter and thicker, like a tank on many limbs. Each day came with a growing sense of dread. She knew that she should stop, but she couldn't bear to hear that terrible shouting in her mind again. The nights were the worst, lying on her bed, feeling its presence beneath her, feeling those stalked eyes piercing the mattress, feeling its mind and its hunger. Her parents noticed that she was barely sleeping and began to suggest a trip to the doctors. But through some dark spell of the deep, they had not discovered her secret. 2 weeks and 2 days from when she had first caught the crab, and she decided that it had to stop. She spent all that day at school screwing up her courage, steeling herself to face the creature. She did not collect any food for it that day. She went straight upstairs when she got home, barely saying a word to Mum and Dad in the living room. It was cold and dank in her room. The crab filled the entire space beneath her bed, which had become a wet cave shrouded in blackness, where the sound of dripping water echoed, and the only light was the glowing white of the crab's eyes. Holly took a deep breath. "I need to talk to you," she said aloud. "Where is my food? I am hungry, I must feed. Feed me, hungry must eat, rip, feed." The cacophony inside her mind made her head throb with pain. "No," she yelled, "no more. I'm not feeding you any more." The crab continued to screech within her head, shouting more of the same. "Feed, rip, tear, feast, hungry. You asked me on the first night to let you go. I am letting you go. You can swim out to the ocean and feed as much as you like out there. There must be more for you to eat out there." She said it as a plea as much as a statement. The crab's thick legs, like logs of driftwood, clicked out from underneath the bed, grasping at the bed frame and pulling itself forth into the open. The creature drew itself up to its full and considerable height, now twice as tall as Holly and growing greater still. Its pincers snapped in her face, its mandibles clicked, spraying salt water. Her entire room now seemed like a deep and dank tide pool beneath a black night, the lair of this terrible thing that she had dredged up from the deep. A claw swung at her, clipping her on the side of her head and knocking her to the floor. As she landed, her arm hit something hard and clunky, her dad's old LED torch. The monster bore down upon her, its legs caging her in, its pincers open wide to grab her. She grabbed the strap of the torch and swung upwards with all her might. There came a sound somewhere between a squelch and a crunch as the thick casing of the torch made contact with the soft tissue of one of the crab's eye stalks. The monster backed off with a screech, one stalk recoiling into its body. Holly pushed herself to her feet, hefty hefting the torch under one arm with her free hand slamming the on button. A brilliant beam of white light pierced the crab like a blade, illuminating the entire room, casting away the dark, dank shadows. The crab screeched in pain as the light burned its already wounded eye. Holly advanced, holding the torch higher as her foe retreated backwards. The crab stooped low on its legs and seemed to diminish as it crawled backwards beneath the bed, drawing in the damp and the shadows and the silt with it. There was a great rushing and sucking sound like the noise of an enormous drain. With a final scream that echoed in both the bedroom and Holly's mind, the crab shrank into the shadows and, with a final wink of its glowing white eyes, it vanished. Holly fell to her knees and dropped the torch with a thud. Its errant beam angled towards her window. She became aware of the throbbing in the side of her head. She brought her fingers up to her temple and they came away red and sticky. At that moment the door swung open and Mum and Dad came bursting into the room. "Oh my God, Holly," Mum cried. "She's bleeding," Dad said as both her parents stooped down to examine her injury. "Holly, what on earth happened in here?" he asked, looking about the room at the remnants of mud and sand that still clung to the floorboards. Holly began to sob and flung herself into her mother's arms. After a thorough inspection of her temple, Dad determined that the injury was nothing serious, but insisted that a trip to the GP was in order, just in case of concussion. When Holly finally managed to stop crying, she told her parents the truth about what had happened, or at least so far as it went. She told them that she had snuck out to go crabbing and been keeping a crab in a bucket in her room, sneaking it food when she could. She told them how it had grown big, and when it escaped its bucket and came running towards her, she tripped and bumped her head. It wasn't a perfect story. It didn't explain why her bedroom looked like a high tide had washed through it, or why she had turned on the LED torch, or where the crab had gone. Mum suggested that it must have crawled out of a window, or perhaps under her chest of drawers. "It'll turn up eventually," she said. "Dead, most likely," Dad added. "Crabs can't survive for long away from the sea." The GP appointment barely took 10 minutes in the end. The doctor prodded her head gently, shone a light in her eyes, and asked her questions like, "How many fingers am I holding it up?" and "What year is it?" When they got back, Dad declared that they would have a takeaway, his usual solution for any drama or upset. Together, he and Holly strolled into town to the Chinese, a square, flat-roofed building affixed to the local garage, lit by the glow of orange lanterns. Their order was taken by the owner's daughter, who must have been younger than Holly. They returned home with 2 bags of fragrantly steaming food. An hour later, Holly was snuggled up in a blanket on the sofa, watching a movie with a belly full of Chinese food and a hot chocolate in her hands. She pressed the hot mug to her chest and felt its warmth spread through her. A heavy rain began to fall outside. The clattering of raindrops against the windows soothed Holly's mind. The last 2 weeks felt like a bad dream. She awoke in her own bed. She must have drifted off during the movie. She touched her temple. The wound was still there, covered by a plaster. That at least had been real. The rain had not let up overnight. Quite the contrary, it was falling harder than ever. She could hear it beating against the roof like 1,000 tiny drummers, accompanied by a chorus of howling wind. There was a crack and a flash of lightning in her window. Mum took her to school that morning. Both of them were wrapped up in their raincoats, but the coats did little to keep out the deluge. The wind whipped the rain about them so fiercely that at times it seemed as though it was raining upwards, up into Holly's hood and onto her face, and that it dripped down her neck and beneath her clothes. By the time they reached the school, they were both soaking wet. Mum saw her off with a kiss. "I love you, honey." "I love you too, Mum," Holly said. "I know this weather is ghastly, but are you all right to walk home by yourself later? You know me and Dad have got that dinner party round the Pritchards later." "Yeah, no problem." "You're sure, even in this rain?" "It's only a 10-minute walk, Mum. I'll be fine." "Well, if you're sure. Love you again. Have fun." "Bye, Mum. Love you." And with that she ran inside to escape the rain. The weather did not improve all day. The storm was so fierce and unforecast that it was a source of great distraction for all the kids that day. Bits of rubbish caught in the wind flew past the windows, and everyone jumped when a cardboard box, sodden and disintegrating, was thrown against the window. The final bell could hardly be heard over the raging storm. Despite her insistence to Mum earlier that she was fine to walk home in the storm, now that the moment had come, she suddenly felt worried. A shadow of the dread from the past 2 weeks returned. Nonetheless, she waved her friends goodbye and set off home. As she reached her front gate, she knew at once that something was wrong. The front door was left open. It slammed repeatedly against the door frame in the wind. Holly opened the gate and walked up the gravel path to the door, her fear mounting with each step. As she got closer, she saw that its hinges were damaged from the repeated force. There was a streak of black mud across the door, and a trail of it across the floor. Everything in the house was dark. Over the howling of the wind and the pelting rain, over the cracking of thunder, she could hear something else, a fervent, feverish whispering that echoed within her head and made the wound on her temple throb anew. Feed, eat, flesh, flesh rip. Feast, feed, came the familiar voice. Holly's heart dropped like a pebble into an ocean trench. She stepped over the threshold into the unlit landing, following the echoing whispers. They were coming from the living room. They were not the only sounds. There were shifting, clicking sounds, like something very large moving very quickly and suddenly, before settling into place and standing still for a while before the next burst of movement. And there was another sound as well, the sound of chewing. Holly rounded the stairs and peeked her head into the living room. Larger than ever before, the crab crouched by the sofa, hunched over a prone shape. It bore down on it, mandibles snapping and biting. As it fed, its psychic whispering rose and fell in a burbling chorus of growing rage and ecstasy. The crab snapped towards her. Its eye stalks swung to get a bead on her, its jaws dripping red. Holly screamed and half fell, half ran backwards out of the house and into the garden. The crab's screeching wail followed her out. She fell to the ground sobbing, her hands planting into the slick, muddy grass. Beyond the house, the sea was abroil. Huge shapes were rising out of the water, like islands of hard stone rising from the depths. The psychic screams of the crab continued to ring in Holly's ears, but now it was oh so clear that they were but the cries of a hungry child. And the shapes rising from the sea called out in answer. Countless pillars of grey flesh swayed in the stormy sky, and atop each one was a great glowing eye, like a host of cold stars. I hope that you guys enjoyed today's story. If you did, I'd really appreciate it if you could give this video a like, comment on any parts that you enjoyed, or didn't, and subscribe to my channel so that you can see future videos. I hope that you guys have a very good day or night, and I will see you in the next video.